The refugee's son had a vision. Juan L. and his mother left communist Cuba in 1962 and made their home in Miami on Southwest 6th Street in the heart of Little Cuba. Juan's father, Armando, had been unable to leave with the other refugees because he had to look after his aged parents and a sister, but once they had safely left the island, then he would be able to go. Nearly a year elapsed before arrangements could be made for Armando's sister and parents to flee to the United States. When they were safely across, he set about making plans for his own flight to freedom. Unfortunately, because they were afraid that G2 would arrest Armando, his wife and son did not write to him. As a result, they lost touch with one another, and when Armando's sister and parents finally arrived in the United States, Juan and his mother had no way of knowing they were there or if they had arrived at all. Then one night, while Juan was asleep, he awakened abruptly, hearing his name being called. It was his father's voice. Juan began to tremble. He squeezed his eyes shut and listened, unable to believe what he was hearing. Again and again he heard his father calling him. Then he whispered, "Yes, I hear you, father, I hear you." As soon as he had uttered those words, he got the feeling of motion, like that of being aboard a small boat. All of a sudden he saw his father. He was sprawled out in the bottom of a tiny boat with a broken mast. The boat was adrift, unable to sleep any longer because the reality of his vision had such an overwhelming impact upon him. Juan quietly got dressed and crept out of the small apartment, careful to not disturb his mother, who was asleep in the other room. He went down to the marina on the Miami River, where he often went to talk with the boat captains, who occasionally took him fishing with them, and began to wander along, looking at all the vessels and wished that he had owned one. If he owned one right now, he thought, he'd fill it up with gas and go out into the ocean and find his father. Then Juan stopped walking. He was standing alongside the pier where a sleek fiberglass cruiser was moored. It was a fast job, capable of speeds in excess of 20 knots. He looked at it longingly. The name on the hull was familiar to him. It belonged to a prominent Cuban businessman who had fled to the States shortly after Castro had risen to power and who had done well financially in his adopted country. Impulsively, Juan silently went aboard the vessel. He found the cabin unlocked and went below. The time was 1 a.m. It was so quiet that he could hear the ticking of the brass ship's clock. This was some boat, Juan thought. With such a boat, he could go all the way to Cuba and back before the owner would miss it. He could also go out into the ocean and find his father, and thinking about his father in the silence of the boat cabin, Juan began to cry. Something deep inside him took hold of his emotions. He suddenly began to think that his father would be ashamed of him if he could see him crying. He thought of what his father would do if he were somewhere out on the ocean, adrift in a little boat, probably without food or water. On impulse, Juan hurried topside, turned on the ignition, and checked the fuel gauges. The tanks were full. It was an omen. Of that little Juan was positive. He stealthily released the moorings aft and forward, and with a boat hook, nudged the craft into the channel. As he drifted with the current, he relished what he was doing, because he believed wholeheartedly that he was doing the right thing. Somehow, he did not feel that he was stealing the boat. He was merely borrowing it for a short while. He knew that the owner of the boat was a loyal Cuban, a friend and compatriot, and if he knew the circumstances, Juan was sure that the man would encourage him to do exactly what he was doing now. Then Juan wondered if it wouldn't be better if he told the boat owner first, and asked for permission to borrow the boat. But who would loan an expensive boat like this to a mere boy of 15? And who would believe that such a search was justified because of the vision of a 15-year-old boy? Juan cracked the throttles and turned the switches. Both engines immediately responded and began to purr. It was a good feeling, as he felt the surge of power under the deck and the torque of the props against the wheel in his hands. Juan grew aware of a strange new feeling, a feeling of confidence and certainty of purpose that he had never before known. Within the hour, he was heading southeast, a steady course which he instinctively felt was the right course. the only course for him to steer. At daylight, Juan climbed up to the flying bridge where he could command a better view of the horizon. His heart began to pound with mounting anxiety as time went by. Never once did he get the feeling that what he was doing was wrong. The complete sensation of belief in himself and the course he was steadily pursuing never wavered. He was neither hungry nor thirsty, and although his boyish curiosity had nagged at him, tempting him to see if there was any food aboard, he rejected it, thinking that he dared not leave the bridge for fear that he might somehow miss seeing his father. By noon that day, Juan was more than ever convinced that his father was out there on the ocean somewhere, adrift in the boat he had envisioned. Only once that day had he seen another craft, and that was a small cruiser heading toward Florida. Alone on the sea, Juan could think of nothing else except finding his father. It was nearly 3 o'clock when he noticed for the first time that the tanks were reaching the halfway mark. If he was to get the boat safely back, he either had to find his father now, within the next 30 minutes, or turn back. The next 25 minutes were sheer torture. A cold sweat filmed his lithe young body despite the heat of blazing tropic sun. Then he found himself fingering his miraculous medal, his lips moving in a fervent prayer. He had to be right. He had to. The vision he had was too real. He had seen his father. With all his heart, he believed that. Please, God, he cried out, please don't let me be wrong. Just as the gauges reached the indicators, he cut the engines. With binoculars he had found in one of the lockers, he scanned the horizon. He saw nothing. His eyes felt blurred, and he was unable to tell if it was because of eye strain or because he had nothing to eat all day. He decided to go below. Perhaps he might find something to eat, and then, maybe, he'd take one last look and turn back. Juan found a can of tuna fish and opened it. He ate slowly, not tasting the food at all. Then he looked at this clock. It was nearly 4. With his feet feeling like leaden weights, leaden weights, he slowly mounted the ladder to the deck, then climbed up to the flying bridge. He picked up the binoculars and focused them carefully, peering around and around at the horizon. Nothing but sea and sky as far as the eye could see. He reluctantly reached for the switches, about to start the engines, when suddenly he found that he could not do it. Some strange power from deep inside him made him reach instead for the binoculars which he had laid aside. He picked them up again and climbed up to the pilot's seat, with one foot rested on the seat of the pilot's chair, and the other precariously placed upon the windshield upright. Juan slowly began to sweep the horizon. At that precise moment, the boat started to rock as a rising breeze began to stir up the ocean. The craft rode up a wave and down another, up and then down. The action enabled him to see further, but also prevented him from holding the glasses steady, and that's when Juan spotted something white on the distant horizon. His heart leapt, and he jumped down, started the engines, and began to speed toward the object he had sighted. The minutes dragged as he steered with one hand and kept the binoculars fixed on the tiny white speck he'd seen in the distance with the other. Then suddenly he was able to make it out. There was no doubt about it. It was a boat. It had a broken mast, and it was obviously adrift. 20 minutes later, with his heart pounding in his throat, Juan cut the engines and drew alongside the tiny boat. A man, face down in the bottom of the boat, stirred at the sound of Juan's excited outcries. He pushed himself up and weakly turned. "Father!" Juan screamed with joy, catching the bulwarks of the little boat with the gaff in one hand while leaning over with his other hand eagerly extended. Armando managed to stand. At the sight of his son, whom he had never expected to see again, he wept. Seizing his son's hand and kissing it and offering up a prayer of thanksgiving, Armando clung there for a long moment before he could muster enough strength to climb aboard the sleek cruiser. On the way back to Miami, the Coast Guard, alerted for the missing boat, took them into custody. When the owner of the pirated vessel learned what had happened, and actually spoke with Armando and Juan, the first thing he said was, "Santa Maria! My boat was used to perform a miracle." He did not press charges. Shortly after Armando was reunited with his wife, the whereabouts of his parents and sister were learned. Today, Armando and his son Juan never mentioned the miraculous vision that had brought them together. Just the smiles on their faces are reminders enough.